Hey friend, welcome to Menopause and Motherhood, the empowering podcast made just for menopausal mums juggling the beautiful chaos of family life. If you're ready to reclaim your health, confidence and sanity, including managing weight and feeling strong again, you are in the right place. I'm your host SJ, and together we'll navigate menopause with practical, real-world advice focused on rest, fuel and movement. The three pillars that support weight loss, boost your energy and help you feel like yourself again. Plus, this podcast is proudly partnered with Mother Cup of Tea, a delicious calming tea designed to support menopausal women's well-being, helping you find balance and calm in your busy day. Now, grab your favourite cuppa and let's dive into today's episode. Hey friend, welcome to today's episode, and if you are new around here, welcome to the Menopause and Motherhood podcast. I'm SJ. On this podcast, we talk about some of the big, real issues affecting real women like you, from hormones to motherhood, from politics to parenting. And today we're diving into a topic that sparks quite a lot of debate on social media and also across mainstream media as well. We're going to be talking about how gender-inclusive language is reshaping the way we talk about women's health and what that means for those of us going through the episode. So I've titled today's episode, Menopause, Language and Healthcare, Are Women Being Heard? And I start with that question because I know that so many of you are like me. You have been in a situation where you have been suffering with menopausal symptoms and you have gone to your doctor or your GP to try and get help and support. And often this help and support is ignored. It's not heard properly. Your symptoms are almost ignored or your symptoms aren't taken seriously. You only need to go back into my podcast, into some of my episodes, particularly one of the episodes where my friend Lindsay shared her journey with her misdiagnosis of her menopause symptoms and everything that she actually went through as I know from my own experience, but also talking to so many of you, how challenging it can be in the healthcare space for our voices to be heard. Our pain is not taken seriously, our symptoms are not taken seriously, and you only need to scroll down and look at some of my previous episodes to really hear this story. In my podcast, one of my really close friends, Lindsay, she shared over 2 episodes her story of misdiagnosis and how that really seriously impacted her life, her husband's life and her children's life. And it almost resulted in her taking her own life. And that's why today I want to have this conversation. I think it's an important question to ask, this idea of menopause language and healthcare. Are women being heard? Because we are seeing over the past few years this shift in how healthcare services are talking about our bodies. And we as women, of course, we have a right to say about how these services are talking about our bodies. We're seeing words like women are sometimes being replaced with phrases like people with uteruses, birthing people, or menstruators. And those changes are part of a push to be more inclusive, particularly of trans and non-binary people who also want to access these services. Now, for many women, especially those of us who are navigating perimenopause and postmenopause, the question is this: in trying to include everyone, are we actually excluding women, especially older women and women who have religious beliefs, from conversations about our own health? A 2022 Policy Exchange survey found that 75% of UK women over 45 said they wanted the word woman to be used in healthcare communication. So that's 3 in 4 of us who want to be referred to as women or a woman. So why does this matter? Because the way that we use language shapes the care that we are given. If we can't name what we are or what we're going through, how can we be able to advocate for ourselves? If, like so many politicians seem to struggle with the concept of what a woman actually is, for example, Keir Starmer, who does actually believe that some women can have penises, how are we going to be able to make sure that women, and by women I mean biological females, how are we going to be able to name what we're going through? And how can we go to a healthcare provider and really advocate for ourselves around an issue that is linked to our biological sex? Now, on this podcast, we do specifically talk about menopause, but there are so many health issues that are related to our sex, related to the fact that women are biological females. And there are so many health conditions that we have that men do not have. So many things that are related to our hormones that our body produces because we have 2 X chromosomes. My body as a woman is so different to my husband Tim's. We are not the same. And this is why I really believe it's so important for us to get the language right with this. Okay, so let's talk about menopause care for a moment. We already know it's massively underfunded and under-discussed, because it's actually only really recently through some celebrities like Davina McCall, for example, where menopause is actually starting to become more of a mainstream conversation. Around particular religions and cultures, there are some languages that actually don't even have a word for menopause. And menopause is often so misunderstood. And there are so many women who do not know what menopause is. And there are so many women who wait years and years for a diagnosis. And some are misdiagnosed with anxiety and depression. You just need to go back to listen to the story of my friend Lindsay, who was misdiagnosed with anxiety, with depression, and that nearly resulted in her taking her own life. There are so many healthcare professionals that have had little or no training around menopause. And so many women, when they go and try and access support from their GP, are just simply told to push through it. Now, imagine on top of all of that we're adding in this idea of confusing language because of gender ideology. So imagine you're walking into a clinic or a doctor's where you don't see the word woman on leaflets about menopause support. For some, it's going to feel hugely alienating and even erasing us as women. And this isn't just a theory. This is actually happening in the UK. And I'm sure for those of you listening outside of the UK, this is happening where you live too. So for example, in Brighton, some NHS guidance referred to people experiencing menopause. And in some training materials, the term female is actually avoided altogether. This sort of language makes me so angry. I am a woman. I am a biological female. My body is going to experience menopause. My husband, Tim, who has an XY chromosomes and is a biological male, he is not going to experience menopause. The way that words are being used in healthcare settings and this misuse of the word women to try and be inclusive really does make me frustrated, because I am a Christian. My beliefs mean that I do not subscribe to gender ideology. I believe God made male and female. It's in the Bible. But I also believe in science. I believe there are male and female. And I believe the word woman describes a female and the word man describes a male. I do, however, as a Christian, believe that people who are struggling with confusion over who they are and whether they think that they are in the wrong body, that they've been born the wrong sex. I believe that people who think that deserve respect, and I believe that they deserve compassionate care, and I believe that care comes in the form of counselling. But I also believe that compassion comes in the form of truth. And I don't believe this trans woman, trans man terminology is actually being compassionate. It's not being truthful. It's not being honest. And this terminology and this confusion around the word woman is actually impacting women like me and women who are trying to access healthcare. I do believe that this trans ideology is having a negative impact on women's healthcare, and especially when it comes to menopause. And the question that I have is, are menopausal women actually being made invisible for the sake of inclusivity? A poll done in 2023 by YouGov actually found that 57% of women over 50 in the UK felt that women's rights are being undermined by current gender identity policies. And only 18% said they feel safe voicing these concerns publicly. And that doesn't surprise me, because the average woman like you and me, if we open our mouths and we say that we don't believe this and that it makes us uncomfortable, we're labelled as being a transphobe. And there has been many cases in the UK where women have been threatened, they've lost their job, you get cast out. And if you look at some of the bigger, more well-known women who speak out around this across social media, J.K. Rowling, if you look at the amount of abuse and threats that she gets. There's a wonderful woman in the UK called Kelly J. Keane. She has an organisation called Let Women Speak, and she holds events where women can go and talk about their experiences of being a woman, about trans ideology. She holds space for women, but the amount of rudeness and threats, and she has even been debanked on a number of occasions because of her saying common sense thing like men can't be women, that women don't have penises. I was listening to a podcast recently with Kelly J. Keane from Let Women Speak in the UK, and she was actually saying that she doesn't have an NHS doctor because she is outspoken and defending this common sense biology. So there is a fear of speaking up. And I think that is definitely something that we need to be able to talk about. And that's what we're doing here on this podcast. Myself, along many other women's rights groups like Sex Matters, Fair Play for Women, believe, as I do, that biological sex matters in healthcare, and that trying to be neutral or inclusive in every setting can dilute the message when it comes to conditions that only affect biological females like menopause. And other people might argue that language is always evolving and that inclusivity doesn't have to come at the cost of clarity, but where does that actually leave us? And I think it's important to look at this language shift. And for those of you living in the UK, you know that in April 2025, there was a Supreme Court ruling that helped those people, namely our Prime Minister, to understand the word woman under the Equality Act, that the word woman refers specifically to biological sex. Now, for those of us with common sense who know that the word woman is linked to our biological sex and that there are only certain things that biological women can experience because we are not small men. What this actually means, this Supreme Court ruling means that in the recent years where the NHS and public health campaigns have moved forward with this gender neutral language, where they have been saying instead of using the word women going through menopause, they've changed their materials to say people experiencing menopause or people with ovaries. Now the Supreme Court has said clearly when the Equality Act talks about protecting women, it means biological sex. So this really does mean that healthcare providers may legally be required to use language that centres and names women explicitly in any policy or practice that deals with sex-based issues like menopause. So what does this actually mean in practice? Now, if we rewind and we think about the NHS, that's the healthcare provider that we have in the UK, if we rewind to when somebody sat in a boardroom and came up with this gender inclusive language and then spent an absolute fortune rebranding everything to make sure that this was inclusive language, I wonder how much that actually cost the NHS. Because now what this actually means is that the NHS that we pay for with our tax money, that is massively underfunded, that struggles to get care for people who actually need it, are actually going to have to start updating their websites and their leaflets again to say what it said previously, where women is a biological female. We're going to have to go through more training for healthcare workers again, just to make sure that they can now use sex-specific terminology without fear of breaking inclusion policies. And it also is going to mean that single-sex menopause clinics or wards could be lawfully restricted to biological women without risk of legal challenge. So all of this costs money. And where does that money come from? It comes from taxpayers. And what does that mean? When you think about money as a pie, that money and that piece of pie that should and could have gone to somebody who actually needed it is being wasted on rebranding websites, creating and printing new leaflets to correct something that actually didn't need correcting in the first place. And who loses out? It's going to be women. It's going to be women's healthcare, because our healthcare has not and is not a priority. So why does this actually matter for women's healthcare? Because we know that menopause has been massively and historically underfunded, under-researched, undertreated and misunderstood. Women have often said they feel invisible at this stage of life, and I agree. The word menopause comes with a lot of stigma attached to it. It makes you feel old, that's for sure, when you think about what your body is actually going through and what that actually means. And that's not something that men can relate to. So for many women now, this ruling is a relief and a line in the sand that actually says, we see you, we're naming you, your biology really matters. But it shouldn't have had to get to this point. Now, funding wise, like most things, the NHS funding is a pie. Like I said earlier, if you take a piece of the pie and give it to another area, then inevitably another service gets less. So if the NHS is spending more money on gender dysphoria services, then other areas such as women's healthcare are going to get less. Let's just take a look at some really simple stats, and I found these very readily on the internet. So in 2023-2024, in the financial year, NHS England's overall planned spend on all gender dysphoria service, including adults and children, don't even get me started on children, was £78.17 million. Now, this was a massive increase from the year 2018 to 2019, where it was 33.4 million. So that's a 134% increase in funding over 5 years. So the question I have is, where is that money going? And also, who is not getting that money, who also needs it? And why have we seen this huge rise in this services over a 5-year period, which coincides with COVID and people being isolating, staying at home, and all of the trauma and the stress that came from COVID? Now, I haven't gone down a rabbit hole and done my research around this, but I did ask the question to ChatGPT. And yes, it says there has been a noted increase in the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, especially among adolescents and young adults in recent years. But it does say that this trend began before the pandemic and seems to have accelerated during and after it. And ChatGPT gives these suggestions as to possible indirect links to the pandemic. So an increased time for self-reflection, being isolated, reduced social obligations, and more time online may have given individuals more space to explore their identities, including gender. You're in the middle of a global crisis, there's a bit of self-reflection going on, isn't there? More and greater internet and social media use. So platforms like TikTok, Reddit and Discord became central social hubs during lockdown. And we've seen the huge rise of certain accounts on TikTok. These environments can provide affirming communities or visibility into different gender ideologies and possibly prompting people to question their gender more openly. And then number 3, it says mental health struggles and support seeking. So the pandemic worsened mental health across the board. We know that. Individuals experiencing anxiety or depression may also confront underlying gender dysphoria as they were seeking support for mental health issues as well. So whilst there isn't proven science between the two, there is definitely an increase in gender dysphoria that coincided with the COVID pandemic. So let's go back to the April 2025 ruling by the Supreme Court, because some advocates for trans and non-binary people have said that the ruling may make healthcare less inclusive, especially for those who experience menopause but don't identify as a woman. I think the question I have, and the thing that concerns me the most, is for the sake of being inclusive for what is a small minority of people, are we excluding the majority in the language that we're using and adding another barrier for women, and by women I mean biological females, in the process for us accessing the care that we need when it comes to our menopause? Now, I say this as somebody who funds a lot of my menopause care privately because I'm not getting the support and the resources that I need through the NHS. So I use a private menopause clinic, which costs me over £200 every time I want to see a doctor. I had to phone up them today and get them to do me a repeat prescription on some of my HRT, and that has cost me over £150. And my question is, particularly with some of the medication that I have, so I actually have estrogen and progesterone prescribed by the NHS. Now, it is only recently that we were able to apply for a certificate, an HRT certificate, that meant that we weren't paying for every single item on the prescription for our HRT. Now, the NHS in the UK only prescribes estrogen and progesterone, and many women like me also find that our testosterone levels decline as we go through menopause, because our bodies do naturally produce a very small amount of testosterone, and it's quite an important hormone for our physical and also our mental well-being. So because I'm not able to access that particular hormone through the NHS, I have to fund it privately. So I have to pay when I see my doctor, and I also have to pay for a prescription and then also for the medication for the testosterone. And I know that for many women that are out there, maybe you're one of them, you might not be able to afford to do that. And what frustrates me about this system is that this chunk of money that the NHS has, of this pie, you can only give it to a certain number of people. And there are so many women out there who are struggling with anxiety, with depression, who are too scared to go and see their doctor, who can't afford to go and access private healthcare in the way that I have. And if you add on top of that this barrier in terms of language, it's incredibly frustrating. So when we think about the NHS pie, and we're talking about nearly 80 million being spent every year on gender dysphoria, when you actually look at the cost per person in terms of population, my question is that money actually being well or fairly spent? And I'm not saying that to be unkind, because when you think about the NHS and the resources that it has, difficult decisions do have to be made within the resources that it has. But my question is a lot of money actually being spent on a very small minority of people? And you may argue that, of course, everybody's life is important. I'm not saying that. And that people with gender dysphoria do have genuine mental health concerns. But it's also really important to remember that for so many women struggling with menopause, they are impacted by anxiety, depression. It can impact our jobs. It can impact our relationships. So actually, when we're thinking about the 78 million that gets spent on gender dysphoria, could that money be better spent from a cost per person perspective? So let me just talk you through what I actually mean by this, because I'm not trying to come across unkind. So in 2021, there was a census question on gender identity. So for those of you outside of the UK, the census is a questionnaire that goes to every single home every 10 years, and it asks questions so that the government can kind of get a view on like what's going on within the population. So in 2021, which was the most recent census, there was a question on gender identity. It was a voluntary question. And the question asked, is the gender you identify with the same as your sex registered at birth? So when the results came back, it was quite unanimous that 93.5% who answered the question answered yes. So that's 45.4 million people. Now, 262,000, which is 0.5%, answered no. And the remaining 6%, the 2.9 million, did not answer the question. So you can kind of make of that as you will. So when you think about it, and you think about the population as a whole, the majority of people in the UK do not have gender dysphoria and identify as the same sex that they were born with. So the question I would like to ask, if I could, to the Prime Minister, the people in charge of our healthcare system here in the UK, is that money being used in the wisest way? Because we do only have a limited amount of money within the NHS. And could that money actually be better spent in terms of the number of people that money could potentially impact? Bearing in mind that the majority of people currently living in the UK identify with the sex that they were born with. Okay, so let's again return back to this Supreme Court ruling for 2025 in April, where the court said that with regards to the Equality Act, that the word woman is about your biological sex and nothing else. So where does that leave us? And so for menopausal women, really what this ruling can mean for us is more accurate, respectful language in healthcare. And what I hope that we don't see anymore is this people who experience menopause, these chest feeders, uterus havers, menstruators. I really hope that we don't see any more of this language. We should also find that we have a greater confidence in accessing women-only services, because we should not be seeing biological men in women's spaces. You should not walk into a menopause clinic and see a man in a dress. And I really hope that we also see like a stronger legal footing so that we can demand menopausal care that actually fits our needs. Now, of course, like we want things to be fair, we want things to be respectful, and we want people all to have dignity. But this idea of inclusion, I believe, should not come at the expense of women's healthcare. Can you imagine going to your doctors or being referred to a menopause clinic and actually being in an environment where there is a biological man who claims to have menopause? And because of his mental health condition, he believes that he is a woman, so he wants to be in a woman's space where he can access women's services. Because although we think that that's crazy and we think that that's not going to happen, well, it's not true, is it? We have seen men trying to breastfeed children, to breastfeed babies. We've seen men demanding to go to breastfeeding classes. We've seen men who are demanding to be in women's prisons, in women's refuges. And we've seen the demands from these men who want to attend and be included in services that are specifically for women that are linked to our biological sex. And I have a huge problem about this. I mean, inevitably, when you look at these conversations going on social media, in these conversations, we often have the discussions around bathrooms. And I actually think that when it comes to talking about menopause and women, this is actually quite an important topic for those of us that are menopausal as well. Because many of us, when we're experiencing menopause symptoms, we can experience things like cramps, we can experience flooding, which is just horrendous. And we deserve to have dignity and space in a women-only space. Like, if I am going through cramps, if I'm like literally flooding, I do not want to be in a bathroom where there is a man present. And can you imagine it? You rush to the bathroom because you can feel that you've just had like the worst period possible, and they have a habit of appearing out of nowhere. Can you imagine as you go into the women's toilets and you see 6'2" Glenda in her dress in the bathroom with you, touching up her lipstick and doing her hair, and like some of these like confused men take photos and selfies in the women's toilets, and your main concern is you're trying to deal with this problem that only women have, and you're embarrassed, you're humiliated, and then you're confronted with that. It's just not acceptable. And what we really hope as a result of this is that it just provides clarity, and it gives us this strong legal footing to demand women-only services, women-only spaces, because we are entitled to this, because our bodies are different from men's, and we face different challenges because of our female biology. So yes, I did finish the gender ideology conversation in the bathroom, because that's where a lot of these conversations end up centering around. I really strongly believe that men should not be allowed in women's spaces, and women's bathrooms are one of them, whether it's for menopausal women or for my daughter who is 8 years old. It's just not acceptable. So let's wrap it up there, because I'd really like to hear what you think. Like, has the language and the way that the language has changed around menopause, like, has it made you feel invisible? Do you still feel seen? Do you feel excluded? Do you feel that we need to do more to protect women's health care? What do you think could be done to do better for women's healthcare? What kind of services would you like to see in your area? Is it different where you live? I'm coming at this from the perspective of somebody who lives in the UK. For those of you outside of the UK, what is it like for you? What's the language? How do you feel? Do you feel valued? Do you feel that you're getting the services and the resources that you need? What examples of really good practice are there out there? Because I have seen that in the private healthcare system. I go to an organisation called Newson Health, which has a number of different menopause clinics across the UK, but you have to pay for it. And it costs a lot of money, and not everybody has the privilege to be able to access that kind of healthcare. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to hear any feedback that you have. The link to my email is in the show notes. You can come and find me over on social media as well. My social media handles are in the show notes as well. I hope you found today's episode interesting, helpful. I think it's an important discussion that we need to have, because I think women can very easily become invisible, and particularly for older menopausal women like that, it's very easy for us to be forgotten and pushed to the side. But we're not going to let that happen. We're going to stand strong as a community together and ensure that we're getting the care and the healthcare that we deserve.
Thank you for listening to my mum's podcast. I hope you like it. Please share it with a friend.
Thanks so much for listening to Menopause and Motherhood. I hope you found today's episode helpful and inspiring as you navigate this journey. Remember, it's all about small steps, resting well, fueling your body, and moving in ways that feel good for you. And don't forget to check out Mother Cup of Tea for the perfect moment of calm in your busy day. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other amazing mums like you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.